Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk about films either current or classic. And this week we are delving deep into that classic category. We are going to be reviewing Ghostbusters 2, all the way back from 1989. Believe it or not, a film that Jim had never seen before. And we're going to be doing some fun segments around this idea. Will's going to tell us more about that coming up here in just a little bit. But let me introduce those two guys that I just mentioned. Jim Pugliafico is with us here on the show. Hey, sweetheart, welcome.
Thanks, babe, and welcome to the podcast, everybody.
And Will Lindis is here as well. Welcome, Will. What's up?
Hey, what's up is I'm about to talk about a classic movie with two of my favorite people to talk about movies with. That's what's up.
As things that are up go, that's definitely a fun one for me. 80s cheese, it's hard to go wrong, right?
Our first COVID quarantine movie. Our first COVID quarantine classic movie. How's that?
Classic
no.
movie. I was going to say. Is it
No.
though?
No, Little
Wait.
Shop.
Little Shop.
Little Shop was
Little
Grizz
Shop.
Tracks that we did. That's
Yeah.
right.
That was
That's
Chris
It counts.
Tracks. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That totally counts. Well, we are definitely excited to talk about Ghostbusters 2. We're also going to be sharing some plugs at the end of the episode. And just a heads up, because this movie, is over 30 years old at this point, we probably are going to spoil Ghostbusters 2. So, if you haven't seen it yet, just bear that in mind. But Will, if you would be so kind, maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about what we're doing with the show for the next few weeks.
Absolutely. So yeah, we all have those gaps in our film history knowledge. Those movies where you just think like, why the hell haven't I seen this thing yet? And so this is our opportunity to fix that. So what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 3 weeks or so, we're each going to be taking a turn rounding out that cinema knowledge with some sort of forgotten classic. Now, like you mentioned, Brad, these are not new films, so our discussions aren't going to be just, did I like the thing or did I not like the thing? But there's also going to be context, historical context for those of us who have already seen it. What was it like seeing it once upon a time? For the person who hadn't seen it yet, what's it like seeing it now through the lens of 2020? So that's going to be a really interesting discussion. And also, like you mentioned, because these are films that are classics, we're going to be talking about older films, which means there's going to be some spoilers. So warning, 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 spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. So of all the different films that we could have picked, we did look back to 1989 with Ghostbusters 2 coming out 5 years on the heels of that first successful outing. We had a popular cartoon series in between, a successful toy line. And when we were all talking about like, what movies have we not seen that we should have? When Jim mentioned Ghostbusters 2, just knowing how beloved this film was, as well as just all of the context of what this film was like in terms of being a little time capsule of the late 80s, this was a slam dunk conversation. So we've seen it. Jim, now you've had a chance to see it. So can you set the table and tell us how you felt about it?
Yeah,
And actually,
definitely.
real quick, before we do, speaking to that love for Ghostbusters 2, Shalimar. Hey, Shalimar, good to hear from
Shalimar.
you. This
Thanks
is
for
one of
joining
my
us.
favorite movies. So,
Ooh.
Shalimar,
Ooh.
excited to have you with us on the show. And
I better
listening
step
in
lightly
for-
on this one. I'm not here to to burst anyone's bubble, that's for sure.
Well, no, but
Well,
you're seeing the film for the first time here through that 2020
Yes.
lens. So
Yeah,
you're
it's-
going to have some different context.
Yeah.
it's
And we'll
okay
talk
to
about
disagree.
That. We'll talk about that. Yeah.
So, what did you think, Jim?
So here's the thing, right? Will, as you mentioned, like I'm watching it through the lens of, I'm kind of taking myself back to that time because I think you kind of have to. It's definitely a different flavor to this movie that we really don't see much in films anymore. That that kind of wacky, go for broke, action mixed, action comedy stuff. I mean, the closest thing you'd have to something like this is, like maybe Guardians of the Galaxy, I guess you could say, is might be a little bit close to that. But um, it was weird sitting down to see this, 1989 film, and I rather enjoyed the ride that this movie took me on. Like I don't know if I should say how old I was when this movie came out.
It's
And
okay. You can say.
that might explain like why I didn't really latch onto me. I wasn't young in the young viewer demographic, even though I grew up with like Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, like on Saturday Night Live and such like that. So I was really familiar with these actors. And I liked the work that they did on Saturday Night Live. I just never really, after Caddyshack and stuff like that, which I loved, I just never kind of followed them into this kind of wacky world, which seemed for 30 or 29-year-old me at the time, it seemed a little much, how should I say it? It seemed like it was aimed at a younger demographic than maybe for me at the time.
And I was very busy. Diplomatic.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was like, I was, starting a family and all that stuff. So, and my daughter at the time was just born, so I was actually kind of too busy probably to sit down and really get into movies, and I didn't. Her as a movie viewer, right? Infants don't really watch movies too much, so it was in kind of a gray area for me, and that's why I missed it. But I really did kind of enjoy it for the goofiness that it had in it. What was kind of weird is that I went back and I watched kind of a summary of the first movie, which I had seen, but it was amazing how much of the first movie did not stay with me. I think I may have seen it once when it came out the first time, and it's like this one. I think I enjoyed the first one, but it's not something that's really going to stay with me. It didn't make an impression. It's like eating a nice meal versus eating, a big thing of candy. Like it's not really gonna stay with you very long. As opposed to like a nice meal. So, I just love seeing the characters in here. It was interesting seeing how the characters have evolved from the first movie. I have some questions about plot, like whose baby was that Donna had? Oscar, like, did they ever talk about whose baby that was?
Only in that 2-minute stint where Dana says, I had a baby in the 5 years since the last movie. I got married and divorced. It's my baby. But outside of that segment, they didn't explain it at all.
So props to the movie for showing like, strong single mother, I guess. Props to that. But it was just kind of hanging in there. Baby as a plot device was there. I liked seeing Peter McNichol, who plays Janosch, I think the guy's name is. Really over the top, goofy character with an accent from, I don't know where the fuck he was from, like some Bavarian country maybe. I can't say where he's supposedly from, but I'm trying to place where I've seen Peter McNichol before. And one of my favorite movies from many years, probably 10 years before this movie, was called Dragon Slayer, and he was like the hero in Dragon Slayer. And I'm putting it together. I'm like, oh yeah, that's where he's from. The villain in this movie is Vigo, right? Is that his name? Vigo, the villain.
Vigo,
who is the Carpathian scourge of Moldavia.
Right. He's basically a painting for 95% of the movie until the end. Pretty awesome and great, because I think he was a professional wrestler and boxer at the time. A character actor, but not a well-seasoned thespian, I guess you could say. Yeah, I did enjoy this movie like I'd enjoy just a nice romp, a good entertainment, fun to sit make fun of. I like some of the stuff they did with like the river of slime, the effects that they did. You could tell the difference in effects between today and then, but given the you give it allowances based on the technology that they had to work with back then. What they put on the screen back then, I'm sure in 1989 looked pretty awesome. This was only like 10 or 12 years after the first Star Wars movie. So, um, you know, uh, special effects was still very much in development. So yeah, that's my experience with Ghostbusters 2. I want to also talk about more details about the movie, but I want to hear kind of what your experiences are with the movie, in terms of maybe growing up in your, adolescence, preteen, whenever you were exposed to this movie at first.
We'll get to that in just a sec. We've got a few comments in the live chat. Christopher says, I love this movie in all capital letters to denote his excitement. Christopher, glad to hear that you love it so much. Christopher and Shalimar, I'm sensing a theme with the love for this film. And speaking of Shalimar, babe, she commented to let us know that the guy who played Vigo was also a doctor in a TV show. May have been ER, may have been something else.
Ooh,
yeah.
We're gonna have to look that up.
Yeah.
Not like Doogie Howser, but
maybe Chicago Hope.
Maybe there were a bunch of those shows at the time. They all blended together.
Saint Elsewhere,
yeah.
Saint Hope. I don't know, but
one of those.
Well, you and I are kind of close. As age groups go, and maybe you could give your counterpoint perspective. You got to see this probably when it first came out, I imagine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to set the stage, I was like 2 or so when the first Ghostbusters came out. And in the years, I don't know, I guess maybe a couple years old, but anyway, somewhere in that realm. So I didn't see the first Ghostbusters film in theaters. But in the gap in between, I was a kid who had the Ghostbusters cartoon and the Ghostbusters toy line, and I had my Ecto cooler. I had Slimer as like a mascot for me. All of those things happened in the years between the movies. So my entry point into Ghostbusters was actually the toy-oriented stuff that kids got. And of course, along the way, I saw the Ghostbusters movie, but I honestly think it was the cartoon I saw first. Excuse me, but I did see this one in theaters.
Don't die.
And I'm trying to try not to, because then I'll come back and I will haunt this stream. So I did see Ghostbusters 2 live in theaters, and I remember it quite fondly. I remember my experiences of just loving like the Ghostbusters themselves, like the character actors. In fact, at the time, I didn't know who Bill Murray was. I knew who Peter Venkman was. I think what's so interesting about this one too is that when I go back and I rewatched it, I rewatched it today, just sort of getting ready for all of this. I think I saw some of the flaws in this movie that I had not experienced when I saw it as a kid and had all of that nostalgic love for it, and the times that I've seen it in between. And I think the biggest flaw that I see with this movie is that in a lot of ways it is plot-wise a retread of some of the plot beats of the first film. That when you follow through the story of the fall from grace, they have to pull back together, they're on the outskirts, montage of them getting better again, all of those different things happen around the same time they do, even with the big set piece at the end. That doesn't make this a bad movie. It does, having a flaw in some ways actually makes it more interesting in retrospect, because it gives me a little point of compare and contrast. What this film does do amazingly well, even despite some of those flaws, is having amazing characters who are always entertaining to watch on screen. It's one of those things where I could probably just watch Ray, Venkman, and Egon like banter around a lab over and over again and be good to go. I would have mentioned Winston too, but unfortunately, the other flaw of this movie is it underutilizes Winston in a way that is
Criminal. I'm just gonna
uncomfortable,
say it.
criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty bad. I mean, and you know, Ernie Hudson deserves a little better than what he got here. Apparently, there was much more that was shot, and a lot of it got trimmed out because you know the showrunner or the filmmakers were really like convinced that they really needed to highlight like the Saturday Night Live connection and sort of like broadcast that. So
Did he get way less in this movie than he got in the first movie?
the same thing happened in both films.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
he got in both films. He got a script that had a lot more on it. They shot less than was in the script, and they aired even less than what was shot. So that by the time he got there, it was in his own words, like one of the most rewarding and fun experiences of his life, and also one of the most frustrating. He enjoyed being on set, working with those guys, enjoyed the work he put in, but it is hard to see like that character sidelined. But all of that aside, this is a fun movie. This is a very fun movie, and the special effects were state of the art for the time. Everything that was happening, you know, you look back and you see like the way the proton packs look, and you know, nowadays like you could probably make that on your iPhone, but back then you couldn't. You know, back then that was cutting edge. In fact, I was even reading some stuff from Bill Murray where he was one of his complaints about the film was like, yeah, I kind of felt like this time around we had more budget and we focused so much on the cutting edge state of the art effects that we didn't do as much with our characters as I would have liked. And that's funny to think of in retrospect, but at the time it was absolutely a true thing. This is a fun rewatch. I think you can put this on at any given time. Like this is a good sick day movie. Is kind of the way I think of Ghostbusters 2. Like I don't necessarily come away from a screening of this with like anything like new or like, you know, challenged or like wowed or anything like that. But I feel comforted. I feel like again, these are familiar characters in a scenario that like is engaging enough that it keeps me invested. Like I do recall like staying home from school sick kind of in the 80s and 90s, and just this would be on and you would just watch it and it would be sort of like the perfect cure for what ailed you. So yeah, that's where this one falls. It's got some flaws, but that doesn't make it a worse movie.
Yeah, no,
I kind of love that you bring this up, Will, and in the lens of like watching it as like a sick day, stay home from school kind of movie, because I frickin' wore this VHS tape out. In fact, we had to replace it because it just stopped working correctly at one point. Like you can only adjust the tracking so much, unfortunately. And, you know, we needed a replacement. But I mean, I love this movie. It holds a very special place in my heart. Back in 1989, that's when my family was moving back from Germany to the United States. My dad was in the army. We were going all over the place. And this was one of the first films that I got to see with my grandpa, who I hadn't seen for like 4 years at that point. And so it was kind of special being able to watch that. And then later on, not to get too maudlin, but my grandpa had Alzheimer's and he lost his memory. But I would like put Ghostbusters 2 on and we would watch it. And I swear to goodness, he would like remember things like watching that movie. And so, you know, on days where I would stay homesick from school, I would pop that movie in. Or, you know, if it was time to hang out with grandpa, I would pop that movie in. Will, you mentioned the cartoon. I loved that cartoon.
never saw
So
it.
much. It's great in so many ways. If you've ever been wanting more Slimer in your Ghostbusters, they really flesh him out as a character in that show. In fact, I remember this episode where like they travel to Slimer's like home dimension or something, and you get to like see Slimer's original form and how he became a ghost, and just so many cool things they could do in an animated series they couldn't really do in the movie. But that said, I think that the cartoon kind of informs some of the things that they did here, especially with the ectoplasm and the slime. I love me some Ecto Cooler. High C brought that back a couple years ago at Halloween. I don't know if they're going to do it again, but we bought a big can of it and used it for the punch that we make. We call it Bitch and Brew at our pumpkin carving parties. And
Hell
so
yeah.
we had some classic Ecto Cooler goodness mixed with a fuck ton of vodka, and it was kind of amazing. But Ghostbusters, I mean, permeates so many different areas of my life. And with the cast, oh my gosh, they're in so many wonderful things I think that we loved as kids, or Jim, maybe you loved as an adult back at the time. Sigourney Weaver, of course, from the Alien franchise. There's even a fun Alien callback, Jim. You pointed it out when we were watching it yesterday, when the hose like slithers down behind her and then like wraps around her. It's kind of like
Right.
the alien dropping down.
Exactly.
Yep. Annie Potts, who I love and adore, she played Mary Jo on Designing Women back when this movie was coming out, and that show was very popular in the early 90s. She's a treasure. She's on Young Sheldon right now, I believe. I only saw the first season of that. I hope her character didn't die. It's only like season 3 or 4, but I love her. She's fantastic. And of course, Rick Moranis, we haven't mentioned him much, but this was kind of during his heyday of, Little Shop of Horrors, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I mean, that guy was like on fire back then. And fucking Kurt Fuller, who I hate, who played the sleazy assistant to the mayor. I hate every character he plays. Every character is the same, but I guess he's a good actor for playing that sleazy slimeball character. I don't know. I could go on and on and on about the things to love, but I feel like it'd be good to just kick things open and go from there.
Brad, you mentioned Rick Moranis, and when he was obviously he's hamming it up in this movie, he's basically taking his character Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors, which we did the Grizz tracks for about a month ago, and cranking it up to 11, basically, kind of the goofiness of Seymour. He cranks it up quite a bit in this movie. And Will, you talked about how Ernie's character, is it Winston? Is that the character's name? Kind of gets short shrifted here of all the Ghostbusters. And you got to kind of wonder, like, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis basically wrote this movie. I don't know how much movie writing, and I don't know who wrote the first movie, actually. I need to go look at that to see if they wrote the first movie also. But you're right. It does seem like they lifted the plot, a lot of the plot beats directly from the first movie, and then just hung a bunch of different stuff on it, changed the villain, changed a few of the things, character relationships. Even Bill Murray, to some degree, seemed, and I commented on this when we watched it, he seemed a little bit removed from the Ghostbusters activities and their efforts kind of in the movie. It was almost like, gee, I wonder if he like had to disappear from shooting for a while, and they kind of wrote his character off to the side to do other scenes, and then kind of stitched it together and then have him come back at the end or something. It felt a little weird. His character seemed more separated from the other team members, I guess, than the Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis character, and even Winston, right?
I think a little bit of that comes from the fact that, and we see this a lot now. I think we were seeing the early stages of this then, but this film was very much affected by franchise. Because, again, we have a success. The first movie in and of itself was sort of its own thing, right? Like, it's just these comedic actors getting together to tell the story of, like, what if exterminators but ghosts. But in that time in between, it launches into this thing where kids are still tuning in every morning to watch the cartoon. And then they're going to the store and they're buying Ghostbusters brand cereal, because I did, and they are making sure that when they get the new Egon toy, but this one now squirts, Ecto water or whatever, that they want to still invest in those characters in such a way that they still feel comfortable with those characters. So in a lot of ways, I feel that this, and we see this a lot nowadays, where like a franchise is unable to really like shake up their characters a lot because they have all of this status quo that they have to maintain. I think this is one of the, I don't want to say early versions, but I definitely earlier versions of that same thing at play. As for Winston, one of the working theories there is apparently it had originally been written with Eddie Murphy in mind for that role, which is why it was a larger role. And I don't remember, there was some reason he wasn't able to do it. I believe there's another film he was doing at the same time, and he did that instead. That's not important. What is important is, and this is something Ernie Hudson would holds to this day, is like, look, Eddie Murphy was sort of like the king of the 80s, and Ernie Hudson, was not the king of the 80s. And so I get why me going into that role means that role changes up quite a bit.
Sure.
Yeah, that changes the movie altogether if you put somebody like Eddie Murphy in that role, right? I mean,
right.
Well, he's going to be cutting it up.
But I think if you put Eddie Murphy in that role, it becomes an Eddie Murphy movie and not a Ghostbusters movie.
That's quite possible.
It's a hard line to walk. Hey, Julie Brooks, who I have known since my time in high school 25 years ago, says, hey, guys. Hey, Julie, good to see you. Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Hey, Julie.
So, fun story. I was looking at the cast of this movie, and there's a picture of a dude shirtless in like the row of cast members that Google serves up. And interestingly enough, let me put this on screen. That is Oscar.
Whoa, baby Oscar.
Yeah, okay.
Baby Oscar in Ghostbusters 2.
He grew up to be a muscle twink. Go figure.
Color me shocked.
It's interesting though, because like we're watching the movie yesterday, and I happened to think like, gosh, I wonder whatever happened to that kid. And then I completely forgot all about it and just saw it. But I'm like, yeah, of course he's grown up at this point. Like
whatever happened to baby Oscar?
And actually he's twins. There were two of them, Hernie Dustin and William Dustin.
Very common for production to go after twins when it comes to babies in movies, because one of them decides to throw a tantrum, you go with the other one.
Well, that's true. I mean, Full House did it. So
yeah. Full House did it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Julie says, silly Brad, I've known you longer than high school. Just turning in for a second.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't want to give away my age too much, but Julie and I go way, 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 way back. Probably, gosh, 30 years at this point, Julie. I don't know. I feel immensely old. I'm going to be 40 next year, guys. That's hard
to put into context, Brad, you were probably watching the Ghostbusters cartoon around the same time I was watching the Ghostbusters cartoon.
I think so. Which was around the same time that Jim was like doing adult stuff in the 80s, like going to dance
parent
clubs
stuff, new parent stuff, right?
Parent stuff, and
Jim being an adult man, gosh. Interesting. Another little cameo that was kind of neat. There's a birthday party or a thing that the Ghostbusters show up to at one point, and it doesn't go super well because they are the little boys, they just want He-Man instead, which was also a fun little gag because that's what was happening with the toy lines and the cartoons at that exact same time too. So I know why that scene and that Easter egg was put in there. But one of those boys was actually Jason Reitman, who is Ivan Reitman's son. And most notably, he went on to become a filmmaker of his own, and he will be directing the what is it? I don't forget the exact name of it, but the next Ghostbusters thing.
So
Afterlife,
Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Afterlife, yeah.
Is that a continuation of the 2016 movie with the same cast?
No, this one, the Ghostbusters Afterlife looks like it's a continuation of these movies, but
the original
set
movies
in
with
modern times. Yeah,
with a different cast.
And I think the new kid is related to Egon, right? Isn't he like Egon's kid or something? And
the trailer has something about like, these things belong to your grandfather, and it's like you see the little thing that says Spangler. So yeah, she is in some way related to Egon, or I guess grandkid.
It was a missed opportunity though for Paul Rudd to be like, "Well, where's your grandfather?" and her to go, "Egon."
Oh, Brad.
Sorry.
Brad.
That was bad. That was terrible. Slap
So
in my wrist.
Slap of the wrist. Okay.
Yeah, it is going to be produced by Ivan Reitman, but written by Jason Reitman. Interesting.
Yep, and directed by Jason Reitman.
Yeah.
Let's just hope they're the Reitman for the job. Okay, I'm done. That's it for the whole show.
But Brad.
Let's be real. I'm not done.
Yeah.
Simon Tolhurst. Hey, Simon. How are you, handsome? Says, oh, Brad puns.
Brad puns. Hashtag Brad puns.
Hashtag Brad jokes.
Yeah.
You have no idea how it's interesting. Like, I love a good pun, and I do sort of like, okay, I can't throw too many out there because I think we would just drown this. If I unloaded the floodgates, I think we would have to become like a pun cast instead.
One of these days, we're going to have to do an episode where we can only speak in puns.
I feel like we've probably done that episode already. I don't know which one, but I'm sure, like, if you cut the non-puns out of it, it's like you still have a full episode just minus the intro and outro.
Well, Shalimar loves the puns too, so maybe we have an audience for a pun-driven show.
They're fun. I love a pun. I only give you a hard time, Brad, because it's more fun puns are only fun when someone groans.
It's true. That's true. You got to have the groanage.
But I will say, not on puns, but on this movie, that I don't think I was that excited for the new movie that's coming out until this movie has re-energized me. So here's the weird part. In watching Ghostbusters 2, I went back and watched like some clips from the first Ghostbusters, and there's a lot of that movie I think I forgot. This just plain out forgot. So I'm gonna go back, but probably before the new movie, and do a rewatch of both of these movies, I think. And leave the 2016 one out because
I mean, yeah, I love the 2016 movie. I know a lot of people didn't, but it's completely not connected to the continuity. So I think going back and watching the first one, Jim, and then watching this one again, I'm totally on board with that idea.
I'm on the same page. I kind of like the 2016 one as well. But if you're going to sit there and do a 1, 2, 3 watch through of everything, you don't want to watch like something that's technically an alternate reality version of it. It doesn't make sense for the marathon.
It's kind of like, I don't know if it'll officially be out of the canon, but it feels like it's out of the canon. Right.
Well, it was already out of the canon because it was, it was a reimagining, right? Like it's that the other characters didn't exist in this one because this was the launch of the Ghostbusters. So in some ways that makes it pretty easier because if it hadn't, and because of the weird backlash to it and just all that shit that was like made the internet, I wouldn't say that that's the thing that made the internet bad in 2016. There are probably some other things that made it a little worse in 2016, but this was an uncomfortable thing from that time.
Mm-hmm. At least the 2016 movie had a really great hunky Chris Hemsworth scene in it.
It did. And the fact that it's out of context means that the new one that's coming up is not going to have to go out of its way to try to like course correct or whatever. It can just continue on and do its own thing, hopefully.
Yeah. Hey, Eric Holmes, Hamstrat says, did I just miss the greatest show you've done? Hammy, is that because we're talking Ghostbusters 2? Are you a big fan of that movie?
I think it's because we mentioned we've probably done an episode that's all puns.
Or is it
nothing to do?
That's what I'm trying to. Or is it both? Right? Is it the movie, the puns, or is it both?
It's like if we were to get like we need to do an episode someday that's like a box of Captain Crunch. It's like oops, all puns. Like we.
I love that idea.
Maybe that's more of a mini-sode. Yeah, Brad. Going back to the cartoon and the toy line and all of that sort of like informs this. There were definitely some parts of this movie that felt very much. So we've got these new like backpacks, right? Like these are the backpacks that shoot the slime, as opposed to the old backpacks that shot the lasers. Now, around that time, again, you had the toy lines. You also had costumes and stuff like that. Kids would have like costume toy versions of like the proton packs. I had one, and the little proton shooter thing. There's a cynical but also like a very realistic part of me that thinks like probably a portion of creating exactly these things and making them look similar enough that they're worn the same way, but distinct enough that they would be a separate item. It very much plays into marketing those toys.
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember as a kid, like, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. That was okay. But I wanted to go as a Ghostbuster so bad after this movie. So my mom, bless her soul, made me a Ghostbusters costume, and she made me a proton pack out of like a broom handle and like a vacuum hose, and it looked, pretty good for a homemade costume. But she made a ghost out of a white sheet and like toilet paper or something in its head, and it's like she put it on my back, and the ghost is like facing behind me, and it's holding up a finger going, making a shush. And so it's like a Ghostbuster walking around with a ghost hiding on his back, all Millennium Falcon hiding on a Star Destroyer hull, kind of idea.
That's a
and
cute
it was
little
like,
touch that probably reminds you of your brother, right?
Oh, it totally does. It totally does. Yeah. So, we didn't have the money for all those toys necessarily, but Ghostbusters was one of those things that you could just like have fun with on your own. You didn't have to have the official proton pack or the official ghost trap. I remember my dad had some like old automotive equipment. One of them was like, I don't know a lot about cars, but what's that thing that you put on a car to raise it up? A jack? Is that what it is?
Yes, that would be a jack.
Okay. He had this like portable jack thing that was like rectangular, and it was on wheels. And I would like, I tied a jump rope to it, and then I would kick that thing out and it would roll across the ground, and I'd pretend it was a ghost jack.
Interesting story. We had the exact same style of jack, like the little brick shaped on wheels, hand pump jack. I did the exact same thing, but mine was swiftly taken from me because that's not a toy.
Well, when you live on a farm, what dad doesn't see out in the haystacks, dad doesn't.
Yeah. But it is interesting because it speaks to these things were very much like a cultural touchstone for a lot of people of a very specific age, from that very specific time, place and time. And that sort of informs like what happened with all of the marketing through the both movies and all the franchises and stuff. The weird stuff that happened in 2016, sort of its resurgence, sort of in the kind of Ready Player One / looking back at the past nostalgia era that we live in now.
Yeah.
It is interesting to rewatch this one though too, because there's also another element of it, which is there is a lot of like very like pro like New York like New York spirit style of things in here, which I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing that in as many movies of that time. You would see it later on, like the Spider-Man movies are famous for having those. Some like 10, 11 years later. But this really did feel like I'm not a New Yorker. I visited, but I've never lived there. But at the same time, you can't help but feel like, fuck yeah, New York when you watch this movie.
Yeah, and we've in some movies you see that, but this is kind of an early example of where like the setting becomes and I don't want to use the cliche, it becomes character, but the setting becomes prominent, right, in the film, and you get a sense of that place through the film and the locations and the characters' interaction with that place. That's kind of cool. You see that with New York in this movie. I think in one of the shitty Godzilla movies was also in New York, if I remember right.
It
You know,
was.
yeah. Or something like even King Kong, you know, back in those days, right?
Poor Matthew Broderick in that Godzilla movie. Man, he had it tough.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the New York Pride and like the American Pride thing. One of the things that this movie just delighted me with was best use of the Statue of Liberty in a movie ever.
Oh yeah. That was
Add a
pretty
fucking
awesome
Motown song and the statue like comes to life
as
walking.
far as special effects go. That was the centerpiece, and I thought it was pretty awesome how they made that come to life and walked it across the Hudson River. I don't know what it is, but anyway,
the Ernie
my New York
Hudson River.
my
Okay, all
Yeah.
right, we'll take it. Well, this
And then-
movie. Oh, go ahead.
and then just smashes the torch right through the museum's giant glass ceiling and takes out Vigo.
Libby smash. It's interesting because they sort of both wrote themselves in and out of a corner with that scene, because they had done this, like they did the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in the first one as this big towering set piece. And so once you're creating the sequel and knowing, again, the limitations we've already discussed, like you can't go too outside of it, you need to have something that matches the intensity of that. You need something big for your set piece. Okay, well, how do you do that? You could just have like a big monster. You could do something along those lines, but instead they figured out a way to tie that. This is an anchor they had to carry into the movie. We have to do a big thing. Well, let's make it about positivity in New York, outweighing all of this negativity, and make this beacon of positivity be our set piece. So I love that. I love that they were trapped and they were able to actually turn that into something that I think is probably net positive for the film.
Yeah, that feeling in the film of how kind of think about it now, right? Of how all the citizens came together kind of at the end, right? And they're all trying to be positive and sing, this positive thing at the end and support each other and the Ghostbusters. It just seems so alien in our thoughts today. It's crazy, but it's a really good message that I'd like to see maybe more movies, bring this message across again. It can be corny or it can be well done, and I'd like to see more movies bring it in.
Yeah, it's interesting, like thinking about New York and New Yorkers that I know. It's usually New Yorkers who are the first to tell you that they are not always the most positive of people. In fact, Shalimar says that's really how people in New York are. Fuck yeah, her family's from New York apparently. I have several friends from New York who say the same thing. But it's interesting how like the mayor in the film, when the Ghostbusters like propose their plan, the mayor's like, "Let me get this straight. Everybody has to be positive and happy and da 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 da."
That's not New York.
He's like, "It's my God-given right to be a miserable asshole." And I was like, "Yeah, that tracks." Okay.
And it feels very resonant now too. I don't want to say that, I don't want to be too Mary Sunshine with this, because I think that it's very easy to look at sort of like sort of straightforward optimism in films and sort of like realize that sometimes it lacks some of the nuance of like what real world is like. But at the same time, like, she's pretty toxic right now, right? And it would be nice if we could all just stand on the streets and sing a song together. Gosh, we this is the second movie we've reviewed where that was a major.
Come together about anything. Just come together about anything.
That was a major plot point in Elf as well.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true. Eric Holmes, Hammy brought up in the chat. Don't know if this is already mentioned, but Max von Sydow did the voice of Vigo in Ghostbusters 2. And unfortunately, we very sadly lost Max back in March. But I did not know that until right now, Hamstrat. So thank you so much for that. That kind of blows my mind a little bit.
I didn't know that either. I know that, like I said, that professional wrestler and actor was the likeness of Vigo,
Mhm.
Wilhelm von Homburg,
Homburg.
who I had never really heard of before.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good catch that it wasn't. I guess it wasn't his voice. I guess they dubbed Max von Sydow.
And it was one of the things I was looking for this time because it was
Yep.
I didn't know who the hell Max von Sydow was for like
No.
the early parts of my life. I didn't know who a lot of these actors were. So getting a chance to rewatch it was interesting to both watch that and also like get a good feel for how good the dubbing was overall. Like there are some dub jobs in films where it's much more obvious that it's someone else speaking. Hell, sometimes it's even the same actor with their own lines ADR'd, a la was it The Snowman? But no, this like they lined it up mostly pretty well on this.
Yeah, I thought it was I didn't even know there was another actor doing the voice, but
that's
good catch.
Yeah.
Ham.
Oh goodness. Well, let's maybe share some final thoughts on Ghostbusters 2, including those of you out there in listener land. If you're watching live on Facebook, of course, welcome. Glad to have you with us. Would love to know your favorite part or piece of Ghostbusters 2. Feel free to share that as we wrap up our discussion. But Jim, what's one more positive for you about this movie?
I just really liked to see like how much it seemed like the cast were kind of enjoying what they were doing as they were filming this movie, right? It did come across that they knew what they were creating, right? It's not serious drama. It's a fun movie, and it looked like they were having fun doing it, and that comes across, and I think it helps the overall feel of the movie. So that's what I take away from it.
How about you, Will?
Yeah, there's been this interesting arc with this film specifically over the last couple of years where it's been re-examined and then re-examined and re-examined again. First re-examined as, hey, this film was not as great as you remember it being. And that was sort of like the discourse, like people sort of like trying to cut through the nostalgia lens. And then there's been sort of like a counter wave to that where it's like, no, actually, here's some things about that were good. And what I love so much about this film very specifically now is that having been through both of those two waves of re-examination recently, I think that it feels really nice to be able to appreciate this film for what it is, warts and all. Being able to appreciate this film both as a product of the 80s, through the nostalgic lens of like my childhood, through the lens of seeing it fall into some of those franchise and sequel traps that we've seen other films fall into, being able to see it through all of those different perspectives and still being able to find like all of those moments of joy and those exciting moments throughout it. So I love this film for exactly. I love this film for like how it's for the things it does well, and I love this film honestly for the things it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's
How about you,
something to be
Brad?
said about perfection and imperfections, right? I mean, this film obviously has some issues, especially when viewed through the lens of today. But I mean, as a comfort watcher, just catching up with this film you haven't seen before. Bill Zanowitz was in the chat earlier from the Comic Book Bears podcast. We love Bill, but he hadn't seen it yet. Since we were spoiling it, unfortunately, Bill had to bail. Bill, if you come back later on after you see it, hope you hear this comment. But
I'm not the last one to see
you're
this
not.
movie.
You're
It's good
not.
to know. I am not.
And you won't be the last. I know several people who've never seen this movie. I was talking to some folks on Facebook because I had posted a link that we were going live a few days ago, and they're like, Ghostbusters 2, I didn't really even like the first one that much. I never saw the second one. I'm like, A, how are we friends? And B, all right, whatever. But yeah, I love this movie through and through. I guess, Jim, to your question, like, what's my last add-on? I'm going to give this movie my award for best use of a Bobby Brown song in a movie with his song on
Belle
our,
Biv DeVoe.
I guess we're gonna have to take
Take control.
That song is so catchy. I have the soundtrack to this movie, and I've listened to that song like 8 times since we watched the movie yesterday, babe. I'm not even that big of a fan of Bobby Brown, but just I don't know, something about that song, and it just kind of sticks with me. So it's fun, and I
Definitely
think
some 80s.
yeah,
I remarked on as we were watching the movies. It's like 80s pop boy band vibe all through this movie. They were definitely trying to I think leverage off of the popularity of that music at the time.
They were, but they found a way to make it work because that was part of the story. Is like, you want
Mhm.
like this positive music that sort of energizes you and gives you hope. So, yeah,
Mhm.
good call, Brad. The music on this is very much a product of its time, but also it slaps.
Oh yeah, for sure. And Hamstrack even agrees. He says, "Yes, Bobby Brown," with like 50 exclamation points. Hammy, glad you enjoyed that too. Some other folks shared some thoughts. Shalimar says there's too many moments to name. She does love the Statue of Liberty scene. She also loves the scene where the Titanic arrives. It's been 84
Ghost
years.
Titanic.
Better late than never.
And Simon Told Her says, I love Sigourney Weaver's career arc here from orchestra member to art restorer and successful single mom while she does it. It's a pretty good gig if you can get it, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
And then Eric says, Rick Moranis when he's delivering his speech in defense of the Ghostbusters, right? He's like, I don't think you should put them in jail because one time I turned into a dog and these guys helped me.
That might get the
Brilliant.
award for like best line of the movie, like gold star.
Mm-hmm. Totally. All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up for Ghostbusters 2. Uh, as Will you pointed out earlier when talking about what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks, this week included, the idea of returning to some of these old films that, somehow one of us just didn't happen to see, right? Films fall through the radar all the time. I think that was just such a great idea because, man, like it's been an hour and I feel all
Yeah.
warm and fuzzy and the cockles of my heart are happy. So I'm really jazzed that we got to talk about this one.
I'm glad you guys helped me pick this one out versus some of the other ones that I listed off. Schindler's List, Last Temptation of Christ, the Mission.
I have to say,
Some
I
rough stuff
loved,
in there.
I loved your list, Jim. But there was a part of me that was sort of like, oh, it's like, okay, guys, what was your favorite part of Schindler's List? Pun, 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 pun. Like that would
Uh,
have been a very different show.
I
Yeah.
just I saw your list, Jim, and I saw the ghost train just coming at me, and I'm like, oh my god. Oh, we need to avoid talking about 90% of
Yeah.
those movies
But
because
I love this format. I love this format. As long as the person who hasn't seen the film gets a chance to list a bunch of films that they have not seen that they would not mind picking up for the first time and watching and getting into. I think that's a lot better than the okay, you must watch this film now.
yeah, I agree. Like I know in the past, like in our Christmas episode, we would do like the movie gift giving thing, and you might get a really dud of a movie, and that can be fun. But I too love this idea of like just putting a list out there. All of us can kind of weigh in. We pick one, we go with it, we see what happens, and man, we've had a ton of folks with us
Mhm.
in the live chat on Facebook this week sharing their own love for Ghostbusters 2. I think this is a solid choice. And if you haven't seen Ghostbusters 2 yet, but you hung around for all the spoilery discussion, don't let that stop you. It's still a really fun movie to go back and visit, even if you haven't seen it before. But guys, before we close out for the week, let's put some other good things on our listeners' radar in the form of some plugs, things we think people may want or might love to check out potentially. Jim, what's your plug this week?
Well, I got a chance to attend an online film festival this week, and I'm not going to list all the movies I saw because I saw like 8 of the films that were available for a badge cost of $30, which was awesome. I wish I
That's
had
great
had a chance
value.
to. I wish I had a chance to plug this last week. Although 2 reasons. We didn't do plugs last week, and I didn't know about it last week, so I couldn't have plugged it. But I found out about it on Twitter. I'm like, ooh, that sounds great. There's some films in there I really like. And, as typical in a typical film festival, you see 8 films. Some of them are going to be you're really going to like. Some of them are so-so, and some of them are like, well, at least I saw it. But I'm going to talk about one that I saw. It's called The Wanting Mayor. This is a film that's executive produced by Shane Carruth, and you guys know that name. He did Primer. He did what's the other one? He did a Color. Upstream Color.
I can't remember. I can't believe I remember the name of that.
I know, right? That's crazy.
You nailed it.
Anyway, he's the executive producer. He didn't have much to do with the creation of this movie. He just wanted to champion a new filmmaker whose name is Nicholas Bateman, I think is his name. This film just blew me away. It's kind of this dystopian world, and these women have generations of women in a family have this recurring dream about leaving the land, the place that they live in, on a ship, and the tickets are very hard to get, and it's amazing what this film did with a micro budget. If there's any chance of you, hopefully this movie will get distribution. It's called The Wanting Mayor, and the title is a tie-in to horses that are gathered up on this land and taken to this other land where they can run free. So I would check that out. Will, I know we need to talk probably because I think there's some others that I saw that you might have had a chance to see.
We will 100% have to talk Kokodi Kokoda soon.
Oh my God, Kokodi Kokoda fucked me up. Yeah.
Oh goodness. All right. Well, thank you for that plug, sweetheart. Will, how about you? What have you got this week?
Yeah, so one of the things that's sort of exciting about right now is that there's still a ton of amazing high-quality films that are coming out, just in different capacities and different forms than what we're normally used to seeing. And one of the films that I caught up with, and it's been out for maybe a week, 2 weeks. It's a relatively new grand scheme of things. Is a movie called Driveways. This movie is it stars Hong Chow, who you might if you guys remember the movie Downsizing, and remember how there was like one good part of that movie, and it was the Hong.
Most of it I forgot.
Yeah, it's a terrible movie, but Hong Chow was the part where it's just like, man, she is just absolutely outperforming this film. So Hong Chow is the lead in this, and she's the mother of this 8-year-old boy. And they move into her sister's house momentarily because the sister has recently passed, and they're clearing out her house and trying to get it ready. Well, meanwhile, the boys has some trouble sort of like interacting with other kids, but he ends up interacting with the next door neighbor, who is a veteran retiree, played by Brian Dennehy. And so, which again, very poignant considering his passing just a month ago. And this is the story about this boy and this retiree kind of at different stages of their life, like forging a friendship. It is an understated film. It's not like a lot of twists and a lot of like maudlin things. It's just an understated film about characters kind of going through these things. Hong Chow gives, my favorite performance of the year so far. Brian Dennehy is amazing. The kid holds his own with both of them. This is the type of movie that will elicit tears from you without being a tear jerker. It's really good. It's called Driveways, and I rented it for like $4.99 on Amazon. So it's available for rental right now on the streaming platforms for just a few bucks.
And that's awesome because we're kind of in a hole right now where we need new things to watch. We need different things to watch. So glad to hear, Will, that's something that's out there and accessible.
Yeah, it sounds like it's probably right up my alley. But Brad, what do you have to plug?
I'm not gonna plug a movie. Sorry. I'm just I am availing myself of the pop culture clause of the Movie Bears podcast plug section in the chart. No, I'm just kidding. We don't really have a charter. No, I
No,
want
no,
to
it
talk.
tracks. What he just says tracks. I'm
Oh.
looking at it right here.
In the
All right,
bylaws.
Section 2, subparagraph 3. I want to talk a little bit about a beloved, wonderful cartoon by Noel Stevenson. And I'm referring to She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. It is a reimagining of the original show. We talked about He-Man earlier via Ghostbusters 2. I thought it only appropriate that She-Ra get a little time as well. I hated this cartoon the first season until about 2/3 of the way through the first season. And then it really picked up a lot of the stupid cornball comedy that turned me off. And I'm weird with comedy anyway. You guys know that. So don't let that hatred like sway you at all. But it got a lot less goofy cornball, got more serious. It got deeper into the lore of some things, and it quickly became one of my favorite cartoons ever. The 5th season, the last batch of episodes ever of the show, just dropped a few weeks ago, and I've kind of been doling them out for myself, watching an episode, I don't know, every couple days or so. But today I had a little time, and I just powered through 5 episodes. How did that happen? I don't know. I've only got 3 episodes left of the whole entire series, and I'm very, very bummed that there's not going to be a new season. But when I think about great animated shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Legend of Korra, or even Netflix's reimagining of Voltron, which also had several great seasons. She-Ra and the Princess of Power definitely stacks up there for me. It does some amazing things with LGBTQ plus messages, gender identity, just being a fucking good person. If you're looking for something really heartwarming and fun to watch while you're in quarantine, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is on Netflix right now.
Heartily co-signed. Like, it is you mentioned the show that it is most like to me, and that is Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is in the running for best television series of all time, and with Korra in there, period, regardless of animation. So and I think She-Ra is maybe like a half step beneath it, but a half step away from perfect is still pretty fucking good. I'm in the same boat. I am slowly doling out like the 5th season because I don't want to binge it and I don't want it to end. But I love these characters. I love this world. I love that it can be silly and goofy and uplifting, but it can also have serious stakes. And that's a very, very fine line to try to walk. And this is one of the few series that I think does a pretty adequate job of it.
Indeed.
I haven't seen hardly any of it except when I walk in the room and Brad's watching it. So I know, Brad, you love it. So I'm sure it's got some.
I think you watched like the first 3 episodes with me of the first season, and we were both like,
that was the rough stuff.
What the fuck is this? And I put it down for a while, and then I picked it up again later and got through more of it, and it hit its stride for me. But again, like, comedy doesn't necessarily trigger for all people. I know a lot of people who tried to watch Steven Universe, and because of the comedy of that show, especially in the first season, it was dialed up to 11. It made it really difficult for them to get in there and give it a fair shot. So, I get it. A lot of people have had the same complaint about the new She-Ra show. But if you have that complaint, take it from someone who powered what I did there, past the rough spot for me and found its brilliance. Because, Will, like you said, I don't think I put it quite at the same level as Avatar and Korra, but man, it's certainly a home run on so many different fronts.
And I don't even think the beginning is even a full power through as much as I think that this is a series that has its own rhythm. It has its own vibe. And I think that as much as anything, you have to just sort of like settle into its rhythm. And sort of like being able to like divorce yourself from the stuff that came before, which is hard because that's strong. But yeah, this is one of those ones that like once you get down into the groove in it, like it delivers. Yeah. I'm glad that you enjoyed this one so much, Brad. And I also am glad that you still have at least a few episodes left to cherish.
I'm glad for you too, Will, but I'm also sad for both of us
Yeah.
because that means it's quickly coming up.
Yeah.
Speaking of the end quickly coming up, the end of our show, I think, is pretty much here. Real quick, why don't we let folks know where they can chat with us about movies or whatever between now and next time we record around this time next week. For our live listeners, our Twitter handles are on the screen by our names, but for our audience who may be listening via Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Jim, where can folks find you online?
Folks can find me to talk about movies. I don't tweet a lot, but you can find me on Twitter at JJP Out West. My initials are JJP and then Out West. Like I said, I don't tweet a lot, but when I do, it's usually about movies. You can tweet me on there. You can message me on there. You can also find me here on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico, which is also right here on the screen.
There you go. All right. Awesome. Thanks, sweetheart. Will, how about you? Where can folks find you?
Yeah, like you mentioned, you can see it on the screen here, but you can find me on Twitter at Whatever Cove. You can find me on Facebook, just search for William Lindis. If you can, send me a quick message so I know that you found me through the show, because there have been a ridiculous number of spam accounts, especially over the last month or so. I just want to know that you're a real boy or girl. So just send me a hello, and I'd love to add you. And you can also find me on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com. Just search for William Lindis, and I'll add you back.
I'm a real boy.
I'm a real boy.
As long as you're
Folks,
a real
you can
person,
find
that's okay.
right. Not necessarily a girl, not necessarily a boy, but a person, I think, is
A
a better way
them.
to. I'm a real person. I think that's perfect. You can find me on Facebook under Brad Harris. I'm the one that probably already has some friends in common with you if you're coming from the Bear or Chubba Chaser community. You can also find me on Twitter. It's here on the screen. But if you're listening via watching, my Twitter handle is at iBradPro. You can also find me on Letterboxd under that same handle. We're going to figure out what movie fell through the gaps for one of us for next week's show, and we'll let you know what that is ahead of time. But just wanted to say thank you to everybody who joined us in the live chat this week. I'm digging doing this on Facebook as opposed to YouTube, because I think a lot of people who normally wouldn't see the show, because Facebook doesn't put YouTube videos very high in its algorithm of what people get to see.
Right.
So it's been awesome having people like Shalimar and Simon and Robert and Noah and Lou. People, we didn't get to read every comment on air. They were going kind of fast, but we love you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you're listening through digital tape delay, don't forget, we love you too just as much. We'd love to hear your comments. You can always send us those comments on our Facebook page or on Twitter at MB Podcast. Thanks so much for supporting the show, everybody. We love you all. Take care. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.